Good morning, everyone. My name is Donovan. I'm the fellow on Chinese society and political economy at the Asia Society Policy Institute's Center for China Analysis. Today, we're bringing you what will be a really interesting discussion about China's wellness boom. 2 days ago was World Health Day, and I want to bring together three experts on different aspects of Chinese society to talk about what people in China are doing to lead better lives. People are taking part in all sorts of activities to help them live in ways that are healthier, more psychologically balanced, and more spiritually rewarding. At the same time, the Chinese government is very interested in the well-being of the people. Since the 19th National Congress in 2017, the party line has been the well-being of the people is the fundamental goal of development. So on the one hand, we have the Chinese government looking to provide the Chinese people with a better quality of life and promote a more harmonious social environment. And at the same time, we have people all over China taking the initiative to lead better lives on their own terms. And this is very positive for the people who are involved in these different activities, provides much needed balance and peace of mind in a time of great uncertainty and tremendous social upheaval. But China's leaders walk a fine line. Do they tolerate all of these activities, and to what extent? So I brought together, as I said, three of our really accomplished experts. First, we have Hsuan-Ying from Taiwan. Hsuan-Ying is an associate professor at the Department of Medical Humanities and Education in the Institute of Public Health at the National Yingmao Zhongtong Daxue in Taiwan. Joining us from Hong Kong is Anna Iskra. Anna is a postdoc at the Center for Culture and the Mind at the University of Copenhagen and a lecturer at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And our own John Osburg, who's a fellow on Chinese society at our Center for China Analysis here at the Asia Society. And he's also an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Rochester. So Hsuan-Ying, I want to start with you. The Psy boom is something that has been going on in China for more than, I would say, a couple decades, 2-3 decades. And can you tell us about the rapid rise of psychiatry in China? What was involved in that, and what really spurred the wave of interest in psychological counseling?
So thank you, GA. Thank you a lot for inviting me, and it's really a pleasure to be here. So in terms of the what I call psycho boom or psych boom, there is a general story and also a more China-specific story. And the general story is something that I guess probably most of the people are quite familiar with. It is often said that economic modernization and also improvement of material conditions would bring interest in mental health or interest in things beyond the simply material. And modernization would also bring a lot of side effects that would need psychological remedies. And I think this could apply to many places, including China. But there is really a more unique China story in which there are many contingencies. And I think the most important factor in it is a certification for psychological counselors first launched by the Chinese state or the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, the 劳动与社会保障部 in 2002. And it is outside higher education. It is open to ordinary people, open to everyone. It is offered by commercially oriented industry, and people usually come to take these courses. They are usually very short-term courses, not necessary to pursue a professional career, but out of like various kinds of interests, maybe they themselves have some kind of issues. So it is for self-help. Maybe they are looking for leisure activities, or they are looking for socialization opportunities. So this really opened up the possibility of studying psychological counseling, and after that, becoming psychological counselors, usually in private practice. And these people, they are usually very active. They are very active agent of, we may say, cultural dissemination. So they try to convince, persuade other people to spread the message of psychological counseling is good, and after that, make up the current thing that in which that psychological counseling has become like very popular and flourishing.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's very interesting to talk about the social dynamic, how people, in a way, it's almost like peer pressure, or people spread the good news about the value of psychological counseling, and this draws more people into that. Anna, you studied the body, heart, soul movement, and I think that dynamic was possibly worked there as well. Can you tell us a bit about this movement? Who was involved and what made people want to join?
So the body, heart, soul, or the body, mind, spirit, as it is more often known in Euro-American context, and historically known as New Age. These types of seminars and workshops, as well as books, started appearing in China in the early 2000s. And this was part of broader transnational circulations of holistic spiritualities. Earlier known as New Age, they borrowed many concepts from so-called Eastern philosophies and religions and transformed them and commercialized them and utilized them for their own purposes. And now, starting from early 2000s, they began circulating back into China, so to speak, and even earlier back into East Asia, mostly through Taiwan and to some degree Hong Kong. So I would argue that this growing interest in alternative spiritualities in New Age in China could be described as yet another cultural or self-development fever. Starting from the beginning of the reform period, there was a whole progression of such fevers in China. Probably the most known ones include the Qigong fever, with, of course, Falun Gong group as probably the most famous case. But then we also had other fevers focused on self-cultivation, such as the English fever, or even the interest in nurturing life, Yangsheng. So I think New Age also serves a similar purpose currently in the society. So on the one hand, this interest in New Age started in China because state bureaucrats basically opened a certain sphere of freedom where people were relatively free to explore different meanings in life and to search for ways to improve their well-being. But at the same time, there is also a dynamic of the state, so to speak, watching them with one eye open and one eye closed. So their activities, which often mix different elements borrowed from religions such as Buddhism, from Taoism, from Confucianism, with different holistic spirituality concepts, or even new religious movements from India, sometimes raise political concerns, all the while attracting middle-class urbanites who mostly seek to find ways to improve their relationships and increase their wealth.
So what are the characteristics of the people who tend to join this movement?
So based on my observations, I would say that around 80% of participants are women. So it is a highly feminized movement, not unlike its incarnations in other contexts, for example, Euro-American contexts. They are mostly middle class or middle class aspiring, coming from bigger cities, first tier, second tier. In fact, this whole New Age boom in mainland China started in Shenzhen, where I also did my fieldwork. There are often people who struggle to afford the steep fees of workshops that could, at the time when I was doing fieldwork a few years ago, could cost anything from a few thousand renminbi to even tens of thousands. But these are also people who are highly invested in their self-development. And they perceive these New Age teachings as yet another opportunity to improve themselves or even to gain certifications that they hope to be able to somehow deploy later to use in their, not only in their personal life, but maybe in their professional life. Many of them actually, to reference or to link these groups to what Professor Huang was talking about, many of them actually attended these trainings for the certification for psychological counselors before they were canceled in 2018, I think.
That's fascinating. John, you've written about the middle class urban Chinese who are exploring religious traditions other than the ones that they grew up in. And of course, many of the people in China today who are middle-aged grew up were born in the Cultural Revolution and grew up at a time when China was aggressively secular as Marxist state, and only after really in the 80s were sort of the traditional religious practices resuscitated, and people began to have more freedom to associate and to take part in the religious traditions that are well known in China, including the native Buddhism and Taoism, but also the Christianity and others. So when did this trend really get started? This trend that you write about, and why?
So thanks a lot, GA. So the sort of interest in interest in religion among China's middle class really gets going around the same time as perhaps the phenomenon that Hsuan-Ying and Anna have described. I mean, I would pinpoint it to the late 90s, early 2000s. It coincides with growing affluence, increasing rural to urban migration, and the rise of the internet actually plays a significant role, in particular in the spread of Tibetan Buddhism, where you have charismatic Tibetan monks posting sermons online. A lot of Buddhist study groups are also organizing online. And I would say that there's really three things that drive this interest in religion. I mean, as you mentioned, these are mostly middle-class people being raised in secular households. And, I think there's really three things that draw them to religion. The first is the therapeutic aspects, right? So a lot of people in my own research, when faced with a personal or financial crisis, feel like they don't have the resources to make sense of it or to manage it. And so some may end up, turning to therapy, as is increasingly common now. But certainly during the time of my research, many of them sought out, charismatic religious figures as a means of helping them just manage this particular moment in their life. The second thing I'd point to is that, in particular, Buddhism, Christianity offered a lot of people in my study a kind of an alternative means or framework or set of values for making sense of the changes in Chinese society. And then the third thing I'd point to is that a lot of these religious groups offered them a sense of community. And so this is a time of increasing urbanization, atomization of Chinese society, and people were really drawn to the kind of trust that they found among these religious groups.
You mentioned social media, and I wonder if we could just take a minute to talk about that, because I'm very interested in the role that social media plays in inspiring this growing interest in wellness, all types of wellness across China. I mean, you could see on the one hand, especially during COVID, there was a big rise in the number of online platforms for people to go for psychological counseling and to discuss these things. People were going online to do Bible study together during COVID. And I think a lot of that has carried on to the present day. And of course, you also see a kind of maybe aspirational living element here where people are showing off their accomplishments, whether it's their accomplishments in the gym or their accomplishments losing weight, Are their accomplishments getting these certifications that Anna and Hsuan-Ying mentioned? Or it could be their accomplishments going to Wu Taishan or some sort of pilgrimage around Mount Kailash. So, and of course, this inspires other people to want to do the same. And so I wonder if we could just talk about that for a minute. Anyone can jump in.
The presence on social media and how social media are mobilized. That's your question, right? I'll say a few words. So first of all, I need to say that this New Age milieu in China is incredibly diverse. And just like with the Qigong networks in the past, for example, it's comprised of different charismatic teachers who attract different groups of people. And people also sort of do jump from one teacher to another and attend different types of workshops and sort of shop for spirituality, you might say. So the way people get into this is they are usually added to a group on WeChat by a friend or a colleague. I call that the semi-invisibility of this New Age milieu, because you won't find information about these workshops being, advertised openly. Like you cannot search it online in a search engine. But if you're added to one of these social media groups, then you will find information about everything concerning where the workshops take place, who's teaching them, the content, the fees, and so on. Also, all the transactions take part in WeChat, which in many ways, of course, it is monitored and recorded. But people also find ways to creatively navigate their precarious position as this sort of quasi-religious community, one might say. They oftentimes don't use certain words explicitly. They, for example, don't use words referencing to higher beings, to God. Instead, they emphasize the process of learning and self-improvement. And only when you join those physical workshops, or sometimes those that are moved online, you will find all that more spiritual content.
Hsuan-Ying, we saw, especially during COVID, a huge increase in the number of these online platforms providing access to psychological counseling, advice on mental health. Are these effective? Do these really help people?
Thank you. So the rise of this digital platform related to psychological counseling actually did not begin with the COVID. They actually began, I think, at least like 5 years earlier when the so-called startup fever appeared. So there was a time, for example, in Beijing and also in like Shenzhen or Hangzhou, right? There are a lot of like young people who aspire to become the next Ma Yun, so to become the next entrepreneur, and they pitch their own idea and they create their own companies, usually in the format of a digital platform. And at that time, some of these people, they are either they themselves, they are psychotherapists, or they are heavily interested in psychotherapy. So they somehow created platforms that are related to psychotherapy. And some of them offer psychological services online. They are also, some of them offer the so-called contents, so information. So they basically write article delivered to people who are interested in consuming this information. And there are also other kind of formats, including psychological tests, maybe meditation exercises. So even though psychotherapy is probably often featured very prominently, but the kind of services they offer is actually very, very diverse, not just psychotherapy. And during the COVID pandemic, because of the lockdown, so people naturally would go to these kind of services that are developed at a distance, and they also have attracted a lot of attention. But but how much they are used, I think is another issue that I don't really have a very clear answer. Yeah.
Well, you can see the market forces the market forces driving the creation of these
So
platforms.
basically, many of them actually got a lot of like venture capital funding because of COVID, because people think this is a great opportunity for these kind of businesses. Even though, as I know, their actual performance is quite mixed.
Right. And it seems there's not really good data, or it's hard to find good data to show how well they're doing.
Yeah, very difficult.
Very difficult. Very difficult.
May I
Anna,
jump in for a second? May I jump in for a second, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Hsuan-Ying, you mentioned, the COVID period and these digital platforms. That made me recall a seminar, a workshop I attended during that time. That was the time when I followed a new religious movement from India that became very, very popular. And since people could not travel to India to go to the ashram, to see the gurus, to get their blessings, they met online. And I attended a session where you had, a number of people on Zoom, and we connected with this ashram in India, and that guru joined us that, is revered and considered, like a god, I would say. And at some point he started healing and sending us energy. So you would have all these Zoom squares with people receiving energy, all the while they were muted. And some of them, had a very emotional reaction to it. And you can see I could see all these emotions in these little black squares, but they were all muted. So it was just a very powerful and interesting moment, how sort of relating to your original question, GA, how social media can become platforms for self-development and spirituality.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. And one of the things that Beijing is concerned about when it comes to these various activities that people are engaged in China, particularly the ones that have a religious or spiritual element, is foreign influence. And so I know that the thing you described at the ashram, Anna, I know that these Indian gurus who've tried to get students in China have come under a lot of scrutiny by the government. And John, you studied people who are followers of the Tibetan Buddhist lamas. How does the government feel about that?
Yeah, they're certainly concerned about, potential foreign influences, obviously linkages to the Dalai Lama. And I would say that in some ways, it's the organizational capacity of these religious networks that Beijing worries about the most, right? That you have, large networks of followers, spread all around China, often in Chinese communities outside of China, in North America, Canada, or North America, Europe, and all linked by a single charismatic lama, and so just the potential for these to turn into something, beyond a religious movement, I think worries Beijing quite a bit. And so in some sense, I think Beijing, as going back to the introduction to this webinar, I think they're happy to have people have some kind of belief, to practice Buddhism in their own homes. And it's really just the social aspect of it, the organizational aspect, capacity of it that they worry about. There's also been the phenomenon in Tibetan Buddhism of fake lamas, of either Tibetans, sometimes Han Chinese, who haven't actually taken monastic vows, pretending to be reincarnated lamas, cheating followers out of money, and so Beijing has tried to take some efforts to manage this, to deal with this problem by, for example, they've created a database of state recognized lamas, but it doesn't seem to be used very often by the followers in my study.
Anna, how about your body, mind, spirit movement? Do you see people engaging in sort of, you mentioned that people want to get the certification perhaps for their professional purposes, and I understand that a lot of these movements are run on a paid basis where people are paying to get to take part in the seminars. Is there much in the way of fraud or people doing this to maybe with some sort of criminal intent in there?
There is, although of course I would not generalize to all of these workshops, but there is a section of this of these networks that promote workshops that I couldn't describe any different than pyramid schemes or multi-level marketing. So it's interesting and kind of ironic because based on what I've learned from body, mind, spirit practitioners, many of them joined such workshops initially because they were struggling financially. They were stuck at work. They could not find any way to increase their wealth. And then someone offered this seminar. The title sounded good, spiritual wealth, right? For example. So people join, and then they found some of them leave when they realize what this whole business model is about, and some of them become part of it. And they, start promoting these workshops and, getting involved in this pyramid scheme. So there's a tension between their own anxiety about their financial situation, but at the same time, their anxiety related to these business models. Because, of course, many of them are aware that there is this looming danger of being scammed present.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Hsuan-Ying, Anna was just talking about the financial difficulties. Of course, now many people in China face economic problems because of the changes in the structure of the economy. Of course, a long time ago, people who had the sort of iron rice bowls at the SOEs lost their jobs. A lot of them, you talk to the taxi drivers, and they used to be factory workers. The move for the emphasis now on moving into more high-tech industries where they use a lot of robots and they need highly specialized, highly educated workers also leaves, a lot of the Chinese who have more basic education and basic skills struggling to get along. And there are also tremendous pressures, as was mentioned earlier, that the young people are under. Very hard for them to find jobs that they find satisfactory. Go through this very competitive test-based education system and study 20 hours a day, and then they come out at the end and not really happy with the opportunities presented to them. And so what we've seen late last year, there was a series of really atrocious, horrible, violent incidents in China, including one in Zhuhai where a guy drove his car into a sports stadium. There were a lot of casualties. And there are other incidents as well. And it seems that some of these were family issues, but a number of them were financial, and people worried about money, people unable to secure good employment. So I want to ask you, Hsuan-Ying, after these incidents, which grabbed headlines around the world, and I think really unsettled not just people in China and worried about their own safety, but unsettled the government in Zhongnanhai, right? They were a bit worried too. Has there been more of an emphasis on mental health on the part of the government in the last few months, and have they been doing anything to try to prevent these kind of things from happening in the future? And on the mental, not on the public security sort of police side, but on the sort of mental health side.
Thank you for this good question. This is also an issue that I really hope to understand. I personally don't know what the government have done after this atrocious event, but I would say that what the government has been doing in recent year seem to be something that they would do for this kind of tragic event, because I think for the Chinese government, mental health always has a very prominent governance or management dimension. So if you look at the policy document in the early days, like in the 1980s, they usually link mental health issues to the prevention or monitoring of the so-called vicious incident, the 恶性事件. And at that time, when they talk about mental health, it's usually strictly about like more severe kind of mental illness, literally major psychosis. So basically, they are reinforcing the very problematic but also quite popular misunderstanding of mentally ill people are naturally quite dangerous. So basically, government concern is always that mentally deranged or unstable people could cause some kind of trouble and need to be monitored and governed. So roughly in late 2000, I would say there is a very large public mental health program, often called the 6A6 program. That is because initial funding was 6.86 million renminbi. So basically, it is a very huge database. So for people with severe mental illness to register in this system, so that the government could provide help, for example, medication, but also because you are into this system, so you are also being monitored to some degree. And in recent year, I think the government is trying to expand this system from the severe mental illness to other kinds of mental health issues. So, for example, they are trying to establish the so-called 社会心理服务体系, the social psychological service system that is often somehow incorporated into the local community basic level, the 基层 social services system, so that these basic level workers they could work for the state while also learning some kind of very rough psychological technique to help the government to take care of the population and also know what is happening at this very elementary level.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a major concern for the party state in Beijing has always been how people identify with the party state and with the nation. So, of course, you get a big emphasis on nationalism, Chinese identity, and a lot of propaganda about China's achievements, economic achievements, and then achievements in other spheres. And but I think the government also more and more is concerned about how people relate to one another. And these kind of, when you see these incidents that we just discussed and the emphasis on mental health that you just described, Hsuan-Ying, I wonder if there's some way that we could get to how the government sees the collective vision, the sort of vision of the collective life of the people that they govern. So I want to ask you, John. John, you did some work on these on some Protestant movements in China, and these are communities of followers who come together and identify. And I think that a lot of the things that we've discussed so far are about self-help, but I'd like to get more into the community side. So, John, could you talk a little bit about these churches you studied and what those communities are like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I can't speak, so I haven't done direct research on Protestant churches, but I can speak a little bit about that. I mean, I think these really do become, in some sense, communities that see themselves as in some sense, kind of opting out of mainstream values in a way, as sort of alternative, providing kind of alternative sources of meaning, forms of mutual support for the people involved in them. And I would say this is true of the Tibetan Buddhist groups that I did research with as well. And I think, and that's part of the reason, obviously, that the Chinese government, finds them somewhat concerning is that they really do seem to be promoting, in some instances, sets of values that might be at odds with some of the, the frameworks that Beijing is promoting.
Yeah, and is this just I want to get now to talk a little bit about wellness in general, where we've talked about people going for psychological counseling. We've talked about some of these spiritual and religious movements. What are the other things? What are other things that people are doing in China today to feel better, or to live more balanced lives, or just to be happier? Anybody can jump in.
I would say, one thing you've seen, especially among younger people in China, is a rise in volunteering, as a source of meaning. And sometimes this overlaps with aspects of their personal faith, but other times it's a kind of purely secular endeavor, and often takes the form of volunteering in poor rural areas, often as teachers, sometimes engaged in other forms of charity work as well.
Yeah. And I know, John, you've written a little bit about people who join the religious movements that you studied. One of the things that they're concerned about is authenticity. And is there something, what's going on in China that draws people to those experiences that they consider sort of more authentic or more real?
Yeah, this was certainly a big theme in my research. I was interested in why people were drawn specifically to Tibetan Buddhism and not to Chinese Buddhism, which would be much more accessible and familiar to a lot of the people in my study. But there was a perception shared among this group that a lot of Chinese religious institutions were sort of corrupted, either by political interference or by commercialization. There was a common narrative among many of the Tibetan Buddhist followers I interviewed that a lot of important teachings, whether we're talking about Taoism or Buddhism, were lost during the Cultural Revolution, and it was perceived that perhaps these might have been better preserved in Tibetan Buddhist institutions. Similarly, with Protestant Christianity, there's often a perception, rightly or wrongly, that the kind of unofficial house churches are going to offer you a more pure, rigorous kind of theology compared with the state-sponsored churches. So it's interesting. I think this illustrates how sometimes state interference and state management of these religious institutions can actually kind of backfire and push people away from them because they see it as, they're not getting the pure, uncut gospel or teachings, as it were.
Interesting. Hsuan-Ying, this I know you're in Taiwan today, and I wonder if people in Taiwan have a different view. Of course, not having gone through the changes that took place in the People's Republic, particularly during the Cultural Revolution, when a lot of these, where religion was really prosecuted and driven underground. Do people in Taiwan have this view of the authentic and inauthentic in terms of their religious experiences or their personal beliefs?
I'm actually not that familiar with Taiwan and also popular religion in Taiwan, but I suppose that a lot of the like what Anna already mentioned, a lot of the current new religious movement or new age movement or the body mind spirit movement, many of these teachers actually come from overseas, and Taiwan is one of the major source. And I think Tibetan Buddhism is also once. I would not say very popular, but it always have a small but also quite devout following in Taiwan. Whether they also think authenticity is very important, I don't really know. Yeah.
Yep. Anna, and so what about you? Are the people that are taking part in the movement that you studied? What are their main worries? What really are what are the things that you see sort of troubling their spirit or making them uneasy?
I would say, as I mentioned before, mainly personal relationships, family problems with children, with spouse, with parents-in-law, and financial issues. These are the two main sort of core issues that people come to these workshops with. But if you don't mind, I would like to refer to this issue of authenticity also in the context of the groups I'm studying, but from a slightly different angle. So as I mentioned, there is an enormous diversity of different methods and teachers available within this body-mind-spirit milieu. So what I've noticed early on, though, is that there is one core thing that all of them or almost all of them share in common, which are these practices of 情绪释放 or emotional release. So during these workshops, basically you would have groups of people from a few individuals to over 1,000 participating in an activity where sort of guided by music, teachers' words, and especially prepared settings, sometimes with different props they can use, they start to release their emotions. So during those sessions, you would see grief, sadness, anger, anxiety, sometimes joy, all coming out. So, you know, after participating in these sessions and talking to people, this issue of emotional authenticity also came up, because I did notice that there was a fair number at each of these sessions of people who were new to this whole thing. And they really seemed to be sort of disaffected and estranged from the group. Didn't know what to do, didn't really feel like releasing so much. But then I talked to more people and realized that actually the issue of emotional authenticity is not that important in these contexts. There is a widespread conviction that if you attend many of these seminars, you gradually will learn you will learn the method of releasing emotions. And essentially, you're advised to initially almost force yourself, sort of in a contrived manner, to scream and cry and so on. And then the expectation is that you will start sort of releasing more and more authentic emotions, sort of in resonance with everybody in the room. So I found that quite interesting and maybe in many ways different from the Euro-American incarnation of New Age that emphasize emotional authenticity so much. Yes, and that links to your question about people's problems and motivations. All these emotions are related to these core issues, but mostly personal relationships, family relationships. So you would have sessions where people engage in, for example, psychodrama, where they group in pairs. And for example, I will imagine you're my mother, and I will like say and scream and yell out all these things I want to tell you. And in this way, through these cathartic experiences, people are guided to sort of find solutions to those problems. But one last thing I'll say is that there is always an emphasis that you need to continuously attend these seminars, because the body is like a glass of water, right? If you stop attending, then this water will continue pouring and you'll be full of these emotions. So you just need to release them all the time.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, you get a sense that people are approaching this with a very kind of practical, instrumental mindset, and they just by attending the training, they will become happier, or they will get the benefit from it without investing the energy or the emotional attention or energy that people maybe in other countries would. I'm sure people in China are investing in these things too, but but people just sort of like, well, if you take the steps, if you check the boxes, if you do the pilgrimage, you will see improvements in your life, without actually investing so much emotional energy in that. And I wonder, Hsuan-Ying, turning back to you, and I know maybe this isn't something you're really an expert on, but talking about the efficacy or the effectiveness of the psychological counseling in China, because I know that a lot of people have achieved this certification, and there are all kinds of platforms that maybe aren't that effective. Do you see an improvement in people's health as a result of the wider availability of psychological counseling?
Okay,
or are people just doing it? They just do the therapy, they go to the session, and then they think, well, that's enough. I don't actually have to make an effort to change my mental habits or my behavior.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of successful stories, but there are also lots of horror stories, because the field in China is really quite chaotic, as you could imagine that, because basically the certification only require like very short-term training. So basically, if you really want to become a therapist, you really need to design your own professional pathway. So you need to, so it's not unlike in many countries in which the psychological profession is more mature. There is a clear pathway, like what kind of degree you need to take, what kind of training you need to do. In China, you have to assemble like a lot of different programs, and hopefully you will become a good therapist. So whether you could meet a good enough therapist, or unfortunately you meet a fraud, that is really totally depend on your luck. But having said that, I would say that there has been, increasingly there is a consensus that professionalization is really important. So more and more people would try. I think nowadays more and more people would recognize the need to receive like more professional kind of training. And even though at this point there is still no, like, for example, state license for psychological counselors, but professional association, they would have their own registry system that would try to create some kind of somewhat more rigorous standard. And interestingly, digital platform themselves, so even though these are startup companies, but they also create their own standard, which happen to be quite rigorous. And of course, there's also a spectrum of different kinds of digital platforms. Some of them feature professional therapy, and some of them feature more like so-called like 陪聊, like companions to talk, to chat with you, that kind of very low cost, not therapy, but some kind of psychological assistant. So there is really a very wide spectrum of services, and that I think would lead to wide spectrum of outcome, I guess.
Gia, if I could just jump in, it's funny, there's a real parallel in the sort of Tibetan Buddhist landscape as well, in which people often kind of shop around for different gurus, and they might have a bad experience with one and then seek out one that's perceived to be more efficacious. And also, have many people in my research had been cheated. They'd either followed a fake monk or just had a bad experience. And so it's kind of interesting. I mean, and then the joke in the Tibetan Buddhist community is also that a lot of monks, are treated as people's personal therapists as well. And so.
And is there also this sort of disconnect between the form and the essence, where people think that, if I just spin the prayer wheel, or I just make the offering, that's enough to save my, to save my soul, or to build the karma. I don't actually have to be a good person.
Well, I mean, there's a huge range in the ways in which people engage with Tibetan Buddhism, from people who are sort of looking to get some quick kind of karmic return, to people who really are, engaged in a serious project of personal transformation. And so it's kind of hard to generalize, I would say.
I mean, because I know your earlier research, you focused a lot on business people and entrepreneurs who maybe some of them were involved in shady practices. And I know that some of these people later went on to become adherents of I think Tibetan Buddhist teachers, isn't that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
So what did this make a difference? Because I know this is something I started out by saying is the state and Xi Jinping, they have moral aspirations for the people, and I wonder if the people have moral aspirations for themselves.
Yeah, I would say that again, it really varies. I mean, you have some people really, even just after engaging with Buddhism, really had very little changes to their lifestyle, and often found ways to justify continuing to engage in somewhat shady business practices in Buddhist terms, and invoking the logic of karma in pretty creative ways. But other people, that I encountered had even, completely given up their previous business pursuits and devoted themselves almost full time to Buddhist cultivation and study, were engaged in all kinds of charity work. And so, it can engender, and even people who were drawn to Buddhism for very kind of pragmatic worldly reasons, like enhancing their career success or, hoping that a business deal was going to succeed, they can end up after, months or years of engaging with this tradition in a very different place, personally and morally.
Anna, can I turn back to you? Do you see the people that you study? Do you see that they have gone through significant changes in their outlook on the world and on society after taking part in these programs?
I wouldn't dare to judge, but I can sort of reference what they told me. And yes, quite a significant number of people say that these workshops have contributed to their personal transformation, mostly related to easier emotional expression and sort of smoothing these important pairs of relationships, as I said, mostly within the family. But these are usually people who are Shen-Xing-Ling, body, mind, spirit, if not addicts, then that really they're passionate about these workshops and they continuously attend them. So they sort of continue being in this state of heightened emotionality, as opposed to those who attend these workshops once or twice. For those who do it occasionally, they would tell me that yes, they would end a 4-day seminar, 13 hours a day of spiritual practice, elated, feeling like a different person. But as time goes by, these effects sort of fade away, in their own words.
Really interesting. And Hsuan-Ying, do you find that that the government is looking for new ways to inspire people to be more moral or more law-abiding or good, through the psychological angle?
I think the government is probably the government is certainly putting a lot of effort into inspiring people, and they sometimes also employ the language of psychology. So if you look at the kind of official discourse nowadays, they mention 心理 something. I think 心理健康 mental health or psychological well-being a lot. But also if you look at these texts closely, you would also feel that they are somewhat vacant because besides saying that you have to be optimistic, you have to be active, you have to work hard, you have to have a positive mindset, and we always know that everyone wants to have a positive mindset, right? Everyone wants to be optimistic and also happy. But the real challenge is really how could we do that? Through what kind of process could we achieve that kind of very ideal process? And I think the state did not really give us an answer about how to do that. It's almost like just following the state, following the ideology, and you will be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that really gets to the key point, right? Which is for Beijing, the well-being of the people is very much identified with the well-being of the state, right? If the people are well, then the state is well. And so they have, I think, a tremendous amount of concern for the people's well-being, and they want to promote wellness and ensure people are, as you say, Hsuan-Ying, people are happy and optimistic. But of course, this is very hard to do. It's very hard to do because people are autonomous, independent beings, and they have their own beliefs and their own feelings, and they live in their own communities and have to deal with their own family problems. So I think the state will forever face this challenge of how to manage this conflict between its vision for the collective life of the people and for how people should live the good life, and of course the the interests that individuals have in pursuing their own dreams and managing their own relationships in the way that they best see fit. So any final thoughts before we wrap it up? If anyone wants to
I think
add to that?
just to, address the theme that you just mentioned. I mean, I feel like the issue is that Beijing, on the one hand, wants, they want to cultivate a moral, psychologically healthy citizenry, but they're not really providing them with the tools to achieve that, in a sense. I mean, official ideology that promotes nationalism and self-sacrifice, at best, I think, is a kind of distraction. I mean, people might feel good that China is becoming strong and powerful, but ultimately that's not going to solve their personal problems. When their business is failing or they have a loved one who's sick, they're going to need some other sorts of tools. And so that's going to lead people to, whether it's religion or psychotherapy or other forms of New Age and spiritual self-help.
Yes, and following up on that, I would say that this effective governance that emphasizes positivity so much, the outspurt or consequence of that is that you have these grassroots groups and networks created where people can sort of legitimately release negativity that is otherwise politically castigated, because I think we know that, emotions like anger, for example, are emotions of protest, can be dissident affects, so to speak.
Very good. Very good. Well, hey, let's wrap it up here. I want to thank all of you very much for taking the time today to join me for this discussion. Hsuan-Ying in Taiwan, Anna in Hong Kong, and of course, our Professor Osburg up in Rochester, New York. So thank you again for joining. This is G.A. Donovan from the Asian Society Policy Center for China Analysis, and we hope to see you at our future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.